The Syntax of Things by Arisha. Chapter 36. To be a Fool. Stripes. He couldn't tell Snape the truth, let alone Dumbledore. The first time Snape had seen the map in Harry's hands had been a nightmare, and he wasn't so sure that this time would go any better. If the Marauder's spells on it chose the wrong moment to make fun of Snape's nose or hair, Snape would think that Harry wanted to mock him, and he wouldn't listen. Snape never listened. He kept insisting on what he thought was right until the world turned upside down. Harry was spying on Malfoy, but not out of stubbornness. Even Hermione refused to understand. "You're obsessed," she'd said a few days ago, and it wasn't the first time. Under his duvet, Harry watched as Malfoy's tiny dot faded into nothingness. What was in the room of requirement? And more importantly, what was Malfoy doing in there? He could be using the room for anything. He could be training himself on the unforgivables. Harry rolled on his belly and propped himself up on his elbows. He wondered if the castle could feel that it was being used against itself. Would it prevent Malfoy from doing whatever he was doing? Was he alone in there? He checked the Slytherin common room on the map, only to see the rest of the students sleeping in their beds. Trailing his finger over the yellowed paper, he found Snape's dad as well, sleeping in peace in his chambers. Snape had fallen asleep a couple of hours ago. Harry had resisted the urge to take advantage of his generosity again, and it spared him the pleasure of keeping him company tonight. He supposed Snape had been rather relieved when Harry failed to appear. He looked at his own dot, unmoving in the Gryffindor dormitory. Harry Potter, it said in cursive under it. Harry brushed his finger on it and briefly wondered what would happen to him if he rubbed at it until it was erased. He yawned, but refused to shut his eyes. Once again, he'd spent the entire evening with Dumbledore, seeing old memories and discussing his understanding of them. Coming to Snape right after for more torture would be idiotic. Loomis. He checked the clock on the bedside table. He really should go to sleep, and he would, in 5 minutes. Come on, Harry whispered. Where are you? He tapped his fingers nervously on the map. Malfoy had to be somewhere. He'd have to show up eventually. The Draco Malfoy dot popped up in a random corridor and started moving, heading down to the dungeons. Harry pressed his lips into a thin line in anticipation. Disappointment washed over him as Malfoy went back to his bed and his dot stopped moving. Annoyed, he folded the map in two and placed it under his pillow. He closed his eyes. He couldn't sleep. He envied the other boys, Ron and Dean and Seamus and the rest. They all slept so easily. Their brains must be so peaceful, Harry thought. The floorboards of their skulls well swept, and all the little monsters closed up in the trunks at the foot of their beds. When he slid out of bed and wore his shoes, he wasn't even ashamed. How could he sleep when he laid in bed awake and replayed all these worries? How could he sleep when there was the constant danger of Malfoy harming someone, of Snape knowing so and doing nothing to stop it? Harry had promised himself he'd stop caring. Snape was his professor. Professor Snape, an aspect of his mind chanted, not Severus or anything else. Severus, another aspect protested. He could not help himself any more. There was no point in pretending. What he was taught, and knew too well, was that nothing solved insomnia like a glass of regret, depression, and self-blame. Except for Snape. The dungeons were freezing, and too late he realized that he should be wearing something warmer than pajamas. Ignoring his better sense telling him that he should disappear and pretend he didn't exist until Snape forgot he ever met him, he knocked on the door. When a minute passed, he knocked again. And then he dropped his casualness and began a rhythmic, repetitive knocking, determined to get an answer. He got one, and it wasn't great. Snape opened the door and grabbed him by his shoulder, dragging him in and shaking him hard. Have you completely lost your mind, you insufferable little wreck? You arrogant, insolent bugger! Harry was torn between getting angry and suppressing a smile as Snape shook him. Snape's hair was wild, and he was barefoot. He was dressed in a nightgown, one of those plain traditional ones the past professors often wore at some of the portraits by the kitchens. You're turning up everywhere, every miserable moment of my life, and eat away my days, my hours. Stop laughing, Potter! And now you wake me up in the middle of the night as well. I didn't ask you! It's 2 a.m. Some of us have to wake up in a few hours if we want to see a salary anytime soon. All right, Harry said. Snape's face was pink. Harry almost pitied him. Snape let him go, and Harry fought the urge to rub the sore spot on his shoulder. Snape was about to open the door again when Harry talked. Can I stay? You can go to sleep if you want. I won't make any noise, I promise. I'll read a book or something. I couldn't sleep up there. I won't stay too long. Since he came to Hogwarts for the first time, Harry always spent his nights talking with Ron. The small talk about Quidditch or girls or Ron's family was always helpful and made him forget the things that troubled him. And when he couldn't forget, he could share. Ron wasn't just a friendly ear, he was a friend. Only he wasn't anymore, and Harry had nowhere else to go. Snape raised his hands up in the air as though to cosmically question his luck and left for his bedroom. "Make a sound, and I'll kill you," he snarled before banging the door closed. Harry took off his shoes and made himself comfortable on the couch. Taking the prince's book out of his cloak, he read. Harry wasn't sure how much time had passed when he yawned. The common room suddenly seemed 100 miles away, and he had a terrible suspicion that if he started walking now, he'd never get his sleepiness back. Battling between taking a nap on the couch and doing what was right, Harry decided on the latter. Pushing away from the increasingly tempting comfort of his spot on the cushions, he picked up his cloak and dragged himself to the door. To find it locked. Alohomora! Damn! Shrugging, he came to the conclusion that this wasn't his fault after all. Opening the door to Snape's bedroom, he whispered a hesitant "Loomis," and saw Snape sleeping on his stomach on a large bed, the floor creaking under his feet with each wary step. Harry walked closer and poked him with his wand between his shoulder blades. "Snape, sir." Snape responded with a non-committal grunt. "You've locked the door." Snape's back continued rising and falling as he breathed evenly. "Snape, you've locked me in, and if I stay here, you'll kill me in the morning." He sat on the bed and gritted his teeth. This would seem so convenient tomorrow morning. Well, if Snape wanted to lock him in here, he certainly wasn't going to sleep on the couch. Kicking off his shoes, Harry lay down. The sheets smelled of Snape and of Spinner's End. They were soft. It was hard to ignore how much like actually burping on Snape's every moment the whole scene looked like when he covered himself with a blanket and rolled on his side. Snape's fingers were close to his own. "I may be insomniac," Harry whispered, "but I love sleep. My life has the tendency to fall apart when I'm awake, you know." Snape's eyelids remained closed, and Harry closed his own too. Harry woke up before Snape and decided that this was most likely the miracle of the day. The damp darkness of the room was accompanied by the smell of melted candles and maybe some sort of curious fabric freshener. He took his time to let the place sink in as he stretched. It was the room of a living person, the box in which a soul slept at nights and longed for at days. The carpet, as old as time, carried the usual red and dark green delicate patterns all rugs and curtains in Hogwarts seemed to have. Lines twisting like snake tails, stripes twirling round and round, becoming snails, becoming tears of rain and exotic elephants and clouds. Nothing had character in here but Snape. Some people suck the life out of places, Harry thought, and some people give life to them. Some others plainly coexist with space without interfering with it, without leaving or taking bits of anything. Harry had managed to leave the bedroom without waking Snape and spent the early morning studying the prince's spells. It was then that he decided to always take notes on his own books, too, just like the prince had done, despite the library's restrictions. A book is written once, an annotated book is written twice, and carries an extra mind. Sitting by the fireplace, Harry thought. He reached conclusions and dismissed them, too. He made decisions only to dislike them moments later. At the sound of the shower's water running, he prepared himself and hid the prince's book just in time before Snape showed up. Harry stood up quickly and saw the man, now fully dressed, his arms crossed over his chest, giving him a nasty look from the bedroom doorframe. "Why didn't you leave last night?" "The door was locked." "You should have woken me up." "I tried to. You wouldn't even flinch." "Poor you." Snape sneered. He unlocked the door. "Leave carefully. I don't want anyone to know of this degradation. You have less than an hour before defense, and I won't accept any excuses if you're late." Harry grinned. "Yes, sir." He left before Snape could take points for mocking him. As he ran back to the Gryffindor Tower, he realized that most students hadn't woken up yet. He buried the prince's book in his trunk and changed his clothes. He washed his face and brushed his teeth. He tried not to think of having to face the man so soon again, as he combed his hair and failed miserably in making it look decent. The sun shone brilliantly when Ron stretched and pulled aside the bed's curtains. Their eyes met, and Harry's heart skipped a beat. The colors of the morning merged into neon pink and peach as they penetrated the window. "Good morning," Harry tried. Ron rolled aside and sat up. He didn't take his eyes from Harry, but the suspicious look he was granting him with made Harry wish he hadn't talked at all.
Sleep all right?
If you don't want me to talk to you, I'll stop, he thought, but didn't feel strongly enough to say it out loud. Ron didn't respond. Harry sat with Hermione at the Great Hall and listened through all the details of how she was not going to stand Ron's silliness and how Lavender was the dullest girl in the world. I don't understand why he likes her, she said as she spread a spoonful of blueberry marmalade on her slice of bread. I mean, has she ever read a book? I've never seen him in the library, Harry, not once.
I don't think that bothers him,
Harry pointed out. Oh, why wouldn't? He's not any better, is he? It was funny how she struggled to seem uninterested, although she was furrowing her brows whenever she looked at the side of the table Ron was sitting at. Ron, for his part, was discussing something with Dean while they both laughed. Harry used to do that with Ron, too.
Then they deserve each other.
Harry! Harry chuckled.
Sorry.
Oh, I almost forgot. Do you know Kevin Entwistle? Harry shook his head and Hermione leaned closer. Right behind you, Ravenclaw table. The blonde guy sitting by himself. Harry faked a yawn and stretched back, taking a quick glance.
Red shirt?
Yes, that's him. Hermione smiled cleverly. Kevin didn't really look like Hermione's type. I walked past him yesterday morning while going to class. He was left behind with the rest of the boys, and he didn't notice I was looking at him. He was checking them out. Harry tried not to scrunch his face defensively.
So?
I think he might be, gay. But even Hermione could not speak the word, could she? When had gay become a more difficult word than Voldemort? Have you ever talked to him? He reads with me sometimes at the library.
Hermione, I didn't even know his name,
he said. It was kind of her to try and give him a breath of fresh air, so he didn't know why he was suddenly feeling trapped. You should meet him, she decided. I'll introduce you. But Harry couldn't. He had spoken to Ron this morning for the first time in weeks. He'd found the nerve to make the first step. Not that he'd gotten a response, but going out with a boy would be the cherry on top for Ron to completely hate him. Harry would be humiliated. The whole school would know. They'd all make fun of him. Snape would make fun of him.
Let's go.
When they reached the defense classroom, Harry regretted having stayed awake for most of the night. He was so exhausted, and yet he felt like he was never going to sleep again. Snape opened the door and with a sharp look ordered the students in. This time, Harry didn't have to wonder about Snape's bad temper. He flung himself into the seat next to Hermione and tried to avoid thinking. Before we start, I shall collect your essays, Snape said coldly. Harry scowled as he was reminded of the essay he hadn't finished. The scrolls soared into the air and landed in a neat pile on Snape's desk. Harry vaguely wondered why they didn't offer coffee at Hogwarts before classes. Hermione had already organized her things on her desk and was underlining words on her book when Harry opened his bag boringly. Insomnia at night and this hell during the day. Why? 24 scrolls, Snape said coldly. It seems that someone was too busy to study. Harry licked his lips in well-worded despair and half-heartedly raised his hand.
Sir.
Snape looked at him instantly. The I knew it that was hovering over Snape's head should be visible to anyone, really.
I'm really sorry I didn't find the time to complete it yet. I'll bring it to you tomorrow.
Well, sneered Snape. Mr. Potter has provided us with a reasonable excuse here. He didn't have time, because as it is known, Potter has a different schedule from his classmates. Harry took a deep breath and continued looking at him calmly, although his heart was burning. Snape's dark eyes were shining with something that once Harry was sure was hatred. He didn't know what to call it now. Extreme hatred, maybe. And I trust that you are all aware by now one cannot succeed in my class if one is not submitting everything in time. That would be a T for you, I think. Hermione gulped and kicked Harry's leg under the table. It was a warning, but Harry wasn't going to talk back anyway. Snape started a long monologue about the inferi and the defense against them. Harry could do little to pay attention, so he rested his cheek on his fist and watched Snape lazily. Snape didn't look at him. He could hear other people's quills scribbling down notes, and he willed his hand to open his notebook as well. He was tired, sleepy, and a slight panic had begun to take shape inside him. He had slept. Why was he so tired? His mind was attacked by the urge to run to Dumbledore and force him to expel Malfoy, or have him roll up his sleeves in front of everyone in the Great Hall. Hermione would have to apologize then, Ron too, Snape too, Hagrid too. He yawned in abandonment and scribbled at the notebook's corner. Snape had stopped talking. Harry looked up.
However nice of you it is to show up at my class, Potter, you seem to be too good for this. Is my teaching boring you, perhaps?
Harry pressed his lips together. Snape smirked. What is the difference between M3 and zombies?
I don't know, sir.
You don't know, Snape repeated. After all, Snape was still the same bastard, and he still had to attack him every time. It used to be frustrating. It still had to be. It shouldn't feel cordial, and it shouldn't feel amusing. 5 points from Gryffindor, Potter. If you are to be yawning in my class, I suggest you leave. Don't say it. At least don't smile while doing so.
I'm so sorry, sir. You see, I had some trouble getting comfortable in bed last night, so, I didn't sleep well.
Snape's cold expression wasn't enough to fool Harry. He saw the momentary panic in the blank eyes. I won!
I don't see how this concerns the class. Another 5 points.